Today we have to talk about jury instructions in the context of the Donald Trump case in New York State. This is important for you to understand because some of the strategies that, in my opinion, Judge Marchand is going to deploy to make sure that that New York jury convicts Donald Trump of a crime, a decision that will ultimately get overturned on appeal. But I want to talk about how this relates to the Second Amendment. And to make you the smartest person in the room, including if other people in that room are judges and lawyers, we need to talk a little bit about jury instructions, which is really just given the law to jurors. But you need to understand how this works and how anti-gun, or in this case, anti-Trump judges can play this game. Well, you need to watch this video. I think you'll learn a lot, and I'm going to make it quick. Stay tuned. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the U.S. Supreme Court Bar, and author of many Second Amendment-related books, including Disarmed, What the Ukraine War Teaches Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. All right, folks, so I want to talk about jury instructions because as we've talked about on this channel, it's important that you, to support our Second Amendment and constitutional rights, you understand both the substance of law, which is like what is the meaning of the Second Amendment and how does it apply, but you also need to spend some time learning about the process, the procedures, which we talk about, like writs of cert or petitions for cert or, en banc hearings and the like. So today I want to talk about jury instructions. Jury instructions in the context of the Donald Trump case, because I think because you're going to read a lot about President Trump and this trial and what's going to happen next, it's very important that you understand the process of jury instructions and how an anti-gun judge, or in this case, in my view, an anti-Trump judge, can make it so that a jury has no choice but to really convict Donald Trump, regardless of what the actual law is, by virtue of screwing up the jury instructions to make it obvious and easy for the jury to convict. And of course, as we've talked about before, and you probably have heard me say this repeatedly on Fox News, by the time that the jury verdict against Donald Trump gets fixed on appeal, it will be years after the November 2024 presidential election. And this strategy that we're seeing, in my view, Judge Juan Marchand engage in terms of making sure Trump is convicted at the trial level before it gets undone on appeal, is really kind of analogous to what the anti-gun judges do in the Second Amendment context, where they bend over backwards to make sure that modern-day gun control laws are upheld, with a view toward that the U.S. Supreme Court may take years before they can get the bandwidth to get to that particular case and to fix it. And of course, there's a possibility in the Second Amendment context that the current composition of the Supreme Court could change, either by virtue of the Democrats expanding the court and adding a bunch of new Brown Jacksons on the court, or alternatively by replacing some of the older justices on the court, such as Justice Alito or Justice Thomas, with anti-constitutional, anti-Second Amendment judges, again, like Justice Brown Jackson and the like. But anyway, I just want to explain to you exactly, in my opinion, how I think Judge Marchand is going to basically ensure that Donald Trump is convicted of some crime, so the Democrats have that talking point to say that he was convicted of a felony between now and November. Let me tell you how I think it's going to go down, and then I'm going to tell you why it's wrong. So, what is a jury instruction? How does this work? If you've ever been on a jury, you know how this works generally, but let me tell you how it works if you haven't been. You have a court case that's in court that's having a trial, which is a dispute about facts. You have a judge. Think about it. You have the judges in the room. You have the lawyers for the plaintiffs or the prosecution in the criminal case, and you have the lawyers for the defendant, whether it be a civil defendant or a criminal defendant. In the case of the Donald Trump case, where he has been accused of allegedly hiding through falsified business records, this is the argument, that he falsified his bookkeeping programs within his internal operations in such a way to reflect legal expenses when they really should have been written down as something different. And he did this internally to somehow prevent, to cover up some sort of other, what's known as a predicate crime, which means it's a crime that has to be proven to be committed first before you get to the cover, right? Because if you're trying to say that someone covered up a crime, well, the first thing that has to be proven is there was an underlying crime in the first place that you had a motive to cover up in the second place. That is sometimes referred as the predicate crime in various cases. So here, the district attorney for New York County, and remember, I want to remind you of this, that this is New York County. This is Manhattan. This is a county. This is one of thousands of counties in the United States that is doing this against Donald Trump. The reason why I mention this is, if you think about it, You have a single county, a single district attorney elected by one single county of the thousands of counties going after the leading contender to be the next president of the United States. Think about the county in which you live in, right? Maybe you live in Prince George's County in Maryland, right? Maybe you live in some other county in Vermont or in California. Whatever it is, just think about your local district attorney going after Donald Trump to try to bring him down. That is exactly what's happening here. Now, New York County, because it's Manhattan, may get more publicity because the media is there, but the reality is, at the end of the day, this is a county prosecutor trying to bring down the former and potentially future president of the United States. That's how absurd this is. But let's get back to the jury instructions of what's going to happen here. We know that Juan Marchand, the judge in this case, has been anti-Trump start to finish. I don't need to belabor the point. You probably have seen this either on Newsmax or on Fox News or on your internet searches, so I'm not going to bore you with the details here. Just assume for the sake of argument he doesn't like Donald Trump and is going to find a way to rule against him. So how does he make sure that this jury finds a guilty verdict against Donald Trump? Here's what I think he's going to do, which is entirely wrong under the law, and I'll show you why in a second. So before we talk about how Judge Marchand is going to screw this up on purpose, in my opinion, to make sure Donald Trump loses and is convicted of some crime so the Democrats can use it going forward, here's what should happen. What should happen is when the district attorney or a prosecutor is trying to convict you of a cover-up of a crime, and I'm going to keep it very general here because that's all we need to be for you to get the point. There's two levels of crimes that the prosecutor has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Keep in mind that as a matter of constitutional law, you can only be convicted of a crime if every element of that crime is proven by the government under a beyond a reasonable doubt standard, which means there's no reasonable doubt that you committed the murder, let's say. And the elements of the murder would be, for example, I'm just going to use murder as an example to make it clean and easy so you understand the point. So the elements of a murder crime would be that there was a human being that was alive, that you caused his death, and you caused his death on purpose without justification. You see those four elements? Again, I'm keeping it very general just so you get the point. So the government has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a person was alive, that beyond and then he's got to prove the next element the government has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you killed that person, you were the cause of the death. Then the government has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you intended in some way to commit the death, cause the death, okay? And then you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was not justified. I mean, it was not, let's say, self-defense. So the government has to prove each of those elements beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the underlying crime, okay? Now, let us assume that there's an additional crime on top of that in the case. It says, in addition to committing murder, you also conspired to cover up the murder in various ways, and that's a second crime. So they've charged you with committing the murder and also with taking steps to cover up the murder. Well, in the jury charge, or I should say in the crime of covering up the murder, what is the predicate act or the predicate crime that must be proven initially if you're trying to be put in prison for covering up a murder? The answer is you have to have, the government has to prove in the first instance that the predicate crime of murder was actually engaged in. In other words, that you actually committed the murder, and each element to show they committed the murder has to be proven, again, beyond a reasonable doubt. And you'll see why this is so important and how Judge Marchand is going to play this game. So, step one, the predicate crime, beyond a reasonable doubt, every element of committing the murder. Then you go to mark as covering up, or you're covering up the murder. Now, there's going to be other elements for that cover-up. It may be, number one, that there was a crime that was committed, which is the predicate crime of murder. Number two is that you took certain steps to cover it up. Three is that those steps that you took, like falsifying business records or whatever it was illegal. So now the second crime or the secondary crime or the cover-up crime, the government has to prove beyond, hear what I just said, beyond a reasonable doubt that there was a predicate crime committed, which is the murder. Number two, second element, that you took steps beyond a reasonable doubt, the government proves beyond a reasonable doubt that you took steps to cover up the murder, the predicate crime. And third, that perhaps you engaged in falsification or illegal conduct to do that, such as falsifying business records or whatever it is. But you see what I just illustrated there? That you have to apply the beyond the reasonable doubt standard at the predicate crime level and also at the secondary crime of the cover-up crime at the secondary level. You have to prove each element of both the predicate crime and the secondary crime or derivative crime, whatever you want to call that, as a beyond a reasonable doubt. So what is going to happen here? So it looks to me, this is what I think Judge Marchand is going to do, and then I'm going to give you the couple cases that you can be aware of to show why it's wrong. What I think is going to happen to make sure the jury comes back with a guilty verdict is he's going to say to the jury, this is kind of what I'm getting the sense of. He's going to say to the jury, I'm going to give you a list of potential crimes that the government says Donald Trump may have committed. Okay, but he's not going to require, and here's the key. So those list of potential crimes that Donald Trump may have committed are going to be what are the predicate crimes. In my example involving the murder and the cover-up of the murder, basically he's going to lay out, Judge Marchand, that here's like a list of 3 or 4 potential election-related crimes. Some are going to be federal crimes, some may be state crimes. Who knows what else they're going to make up? And he's going to say that these crimes are the predicate crimes. Then he's going to say that here is the secondary crime or the cover-up crime. And what I think he's going to do is he is not going to require the jury agree unanimously, right? He's going to basically say that the jury doesn't have to agree to the quantum they need of the number of jurors to sign off on this, that a predicate crime is going to, that they all agree that a particular predicate crime, in this case, an election violation, I suspect, was committed. So instead of saying that before you can even get to whether or not Donald Trump covered up an election-related crime, the first thing that should happen, of course, is that the jury should be charged with here is the predicate crime. You first and foremost have to agree as a jury that the predicate crime of, let's say, federal election interference was committed. Or you all have to agree unanimously or by the, I think it's unanimous, maybe it's 11 to 12. I can't remember the special rules for New York State. Doesn't matter here for our purposes. You have to agree basically unanimously or close to unanimously that the New York State election law was violated. So you see what I'm saying? So what's going to happen here is I suspect Judge Marchand is not going to require the jury to agree unanimously on any of those predicate crimes. He's just going to say, well, as long as the juror concludes that one of these handful of crimes that may have been committed, that's all he needs to do or she needs to do, and they're going to apply a preponderance of the evidence standard. So as long as the jury thinks that one of these underlying predicate crimes were committed, that's good enough. And here's what's scary. I think what Judge Marchand's going to do is he's going to give a list of potential predicate crimes. Some are federal, some are state and otherwise. And he's going to say, look, if 4 members of the jury thinks that the first federal crime was committed, and 4 members of the jury thinks that the crime B was committed, and 4 other members of the jury thinks crime C was committed, you see what happens there? That in none of those predicate crimes, you will not have a unanimous jury verdict or close to unanimous jury verdict. You'll have like 4 thinks that crime A as a predicate had occurred. 4 will think predicate crime B occurred, and 4 will think predicate crime C occurred potentially. And then none of those, by the way, will apply beyond a reasonable doubt standard for each element of predicate crime A, predicate crime B, or predicate crime C, and you won't have the unanimous jury verdict on any of those 3. So what he's going to say is, once you assume there's a predicate crime out there somewhere that you think occurred, then all you need to do, jury, is to find beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump falsified business records, and he did so to cover up any one of these predicate crimes. Now, this is absolutely illegal under both federal and state law from my quick review. You take a look, tell me if you disagree, we'll see what happens, but I'm sure the Trump team are going to argue this. So just to kind of give you an example, and we don't need to belabor the point, but as I see it, before Donald Trump can be convicted, all the elements of the predicate crime should be proven beyond a reasonable doubt by the district attorney here, and the jury should unanimously agree to that. And also, everything should be beyond a reasonable doubt at that secondary crime of the cover-up. And here's just like an example of something from 2008, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, in a case called United States versus Wood. Here's like an example of how they say that even if you've never been convicted of the predicate crime, a jury can still find that you engaged in the predicate crime, provided that the government proves beyond a reasonable doubt that you did it. Here's the language from United States versus Woods. I'll put a link to this down below, see what you think. Quote, this court has recognized that a defendant's conviction under Section 924C does not depend on his being convicted either previously or contemporaneously of the predicate offense, as long as all of the elements of that offense are proved and found beyond a reasonable doubt. So you see, that's what should happen in my view, which is in this case involving Donald Trump, the jury should be asked, you must find a predicate crime occurred. Here are the elements, and every element must be found unanimously by you, the jurors. beyond a reasonable doubt each element. Okay, just like the example I gave of murder in my hypothetical example. Then the jury, if they find that there's a predicate offense committed, then they go to the cover-up offense elements and have to establish that beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what the government does. But I suspect the way Judge Marchand is going to do this to make sure that Trump is convicted, he's basically going to let the jurors assume without a finding beyond a reasonable doubt that there is a predicate crime that somehow occurred out there and that Donald Trump is covering up. And the only way beyond a reasonable doubt is going to come into this case, I suspect, is Judge Marchand is going to conveniently ignore the fact that the government doesn't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt every element of the predicate offense first, and then beyond a reasonable doubt with every element of the secondary offense of cover-up. This is how I think Judge Marchand is going to play this game, and he's going to get it wrong on the law, and he's not going to care because you will have a jury verdict against Donald Trump, in my view, at the end of the day, because the judge, who is the one neutral person that the jury perceives to be neutral. If you think about it, if you're a juror, you go into that courtroom, you look around, you assume the plaintiffs or the prosecution is going to be arguing for their client, the defense are going to be arguing for the defense, and the one person in the room that you can trust that arranges when you take breaks, when you take a bathroom break, the one person in that room that arranges when you get lunch, when you have dinner, when you go home, when we break, who's that one person that you're beholden to entirely and you must follow the instructions of? That's right, the judge. So the judge is the one guy that is viewed as buddy-buddy to the jury. So the jury looks very carefully at how the judge reacts and what the judge says. The judge, in some ways, is the most persuasive, powerful advocate of any position in that courtroom, in any courtroom, because he is viewed as the neutral party who's friendly with the jury, because without the judge, they don't get to take breaks, they don't get to go to the bathroom, they don't get to take a day off, they don't get any of this stuff. It's the judge that gives it to the jury. So, of course, there's this sort of friendly relationship there. So if the judge gives instructions that are very favorable to the government and very anti-Donald Trump, that is a huge signal and a huge win potentially for the government, because the jury will view that the neutral arbitrator, neutral arbiter here, the judge, is in favor of the government, and that will be a big deal. And again, I think the way these instructions will be drafted will be entirely wrong under the law. But again, it will get Judge Marchand the outcome that I suspect he wants, which is a jury verdict convicting Donald Trump of a felony. And even though it will ultimately get unwound on appeal, it really won't matter for the November 2024 election. But again, I wanted you to understand this process, how this game gets played, because again, it's the same thing that the anti-gun judges like to do. They just rule against the Second Amendment, knowing it's wrong, pretending they think they know what they're doing, but they almost always know what they're doing, in my opinion, and they don't care because they figure as long as their wrongful ruling is in effect, that means that the gun control law is in effect and they can put gun owners in prison as a consequence. And if it takes 4 years to get the Supreme Court and unwound, they don't care because they feel that's at least 4 additional years of gun control laws in America that would not otherwise be there. And it's part of their anti-gun agenda that we've talked about on this channel before. And I just want you to see that analogy. And that's why we sometimes have to talk about the process and the games that get played here by judges, because the sort of thing that Judge Marchand is doing is similar, in my view, to the sort of games that anti-gun judges do in the context of the Second Amendment. And you need to understand this gestalt and how this whole thing works, because it will make you a better and smarter advocate for our constitutional rights, including, but not limited to, our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. All right, folks, there you have it. Hope you learned something here today. Make sure you follow me at X at 4 Boxes Diner, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. And we'll see you again soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.